I think the reason why we have so many people registered for today, it's not only because we have two excellent speakers with us, but also because democracy is more important and urgent than ever to talk about. And I think there's probably a lot of you who might be worried or concerned or are thinking about the trajectory of the global democracy. I was thinking about using some data and figures, but I'm going to give that to Christian, who will do an introduction on some global data regarding democracy. But democracy is declining, and it was the number of countries peaked in 2017 if you're looking at the World Bank definition, and the number of people who are living in democratic countries has also declined. So there is a lot of data showing and looking at how we are currently in a phase of declining democracy globally in many different ways. But I'm going to give the floor to our first speaker. So the agenda for today will be that we will have Christian Felber, who's the co-founder of Economy for Common Good, here with us today to talk about democracy, and specifically democracy from an economy for common good perspective. Then we have João dos Santos from Instituto Democracia and Xeque. I have to practice my Portuguese, with us here today from Brazil, who's also going to talk about democracy, but maybe a little bit more from the digital perspective and the digital landscape that we are in. And then we're going to wrap up with a few questions. I have a few panelist questions related to democracy and economy for common good. But there will also be an opportunity for you to ask your questions. But please save your questions towards the end so we can use the chat for people who might have any technical issues. And also now in the beginning for people to introduce themselves, so you can also see who are here in the room. So I will stop there, and thank you for being here with us today. And I will give the word to Christian.
Thanks, Sophie. Hello, everybody. It's so good to see so many known faces and a lot of interest in this topic. I think many people on the whole globe are quite concerned about the current development of our democracies in their very plural. We live in different forms of democracies, and I guess that most of those who are gathered here are striving for a better, a deeper, better functioning democracy. And I will make a plea for a future fit democracy that is at higher standards than the democracies we're living in today. I will use some slides and also present some figures, as Sophie has just announced. Can you see my slides? Raul, I'm sharing, so now we're double sharing. Raul, can you de-share, please, because I already shared my slides. And
I think you have to share it again since I start sharing.
yes, I now reshared. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, I will briefly talk about the analysis and the current development, but then quite quickly go towards a positive vision of where we could head for in terms of a better democracy. And this is strangely blue, but I just want to mention that the crisis of democracy is not the only crisis we are facing currently. Many people are talking about the poly crisis, and the crisis of democracy is just one facet or one aspect of that poly crisis. And of course, we are also worried about increasing inequality and power concentration. We are worried and concerned about militarization and increasing number of wars. And we are worried about the ecological crisis that is progressing. 6 of 9 planetary boundaries have been transgressed already, and so on and so forth. Just to mention that this is one aspect of the poly crisis we're in, but I think it's worth mentioning because in case we manage to strengthen and to deepen democracy, then it will also be easier to overcome the overall poly crisis. We have both in theory and also empirically evidence that the democracy is on the decline at the global level. Here are some theories that talk about post-democracy, which is quite known since 2000. So it's a comparatively recent phenomenon, and I emphasize it because my generation, there are several generations assembled here, thought that democracy will improve continuously. It was not imaginable that one day the level of democracy could be worse. But now we are facing exactly this trend, and there is both theoretical as well as empirical evidence for that. Post-democracy is the first one by Colin Crouch. Then there was a very widely spread study by Princeton University that did not mention the term oligarchy themselves, but they quoted it in the study. And as an attentive reader, one could understand that they name not Russia, but the United States, a factual oligarchy. And then the third one is econocracy. The term is already from the 1970s, but the famous book from 3 graduates of Manchester University was published in 2016, and they say that economic technocrats are kind of dominating economic policy against the majoritarian will of people in many countries. And just one example of that is the consideration of GDP as a silent dictator, because it has never been voted for by the citizens. We just have it for some reasons. And if people are asked if they want to continue with GDP as the main metric to measure the progress of a nation and the happiness of the people and the well-being of the planet, then people deny it and they ask for something else. But governments don't give it to the people up to date. This is the theoretical base. Here we come to the empirical evidence. Sophie has already mentioned the World Bank report, the report with the richest data base is VDEM, Varieties of Democracy at the University of Gothenburg. And they classify countries in liberal democracies, electoral democracies, electoral autocracies, and closed autocracies. And incredibly to mention, but we have lost 15 of our most eminent liberal democracies in the past 15 years since the great financial crisis. They came down from 44 to 29. There is a third report, it's called Civicus, and this trend is not that dramatic because there was a surprising improvement over the last, from the second last to the last report. But still, over the last 6 years, we lost 10% more a bit of open states, and closed states became more. We could break it down to detail, maybe just 2 details, whereas in 24, freedom of expression was deteriorating only in 7 countries. Today, it's 44 countries. That's a dramatic increase of the number of countries in which freedom of expression is deteriorating, and vice versa. And the last one is that the share of people who live in autocracies had dramatically risen. Of course, one reason is that India is now declared an autocratic country by this report, and one can question that and should challenge that. And that's why the increase is so dramatic. But also the number of countries has risen similarly. And I depart from this classification from the VDEM report that I have already mentioned in order to propose a vision of a 5th category, which today doesn't exist, but which we could envision, which we could not only dream of, but also propose very concretely. And the proposal is to think of common good democracies, or a new premium segment of democracies. I called it sovereign democracies over the past 10 years, and I will explain in a minute why I'm thinking of changing that name. I can do it right away because Russia and the team of Putin is also using the term sovereign democracy, but of course for a total different meaning than mine, and that's why I'm reconsidering the naming of the new, better, deeper, and improved democracy from sovereign democracy to common good democracy. Actually, it's not something new. Actually, it departs from where we are, and in the most liberal constitutions that we have up to today, actually, it's already entailed and included there, saying that all state authority is derived from the people, and it shall be exercised by these people not only through elections, that is very important, but also by votes. And this is something which is enshrined in Germany's basic law, but it has not been implemented in regular laws on the federal state level. It has been implemented on the local and regional level, but not on the federal state level. And this is exactly the exercise I propose to make. But there is one further thought, and one further thought is that we could further develop division of powers, because we haven't changed our understanding of division of powers since Montesquieu and Rousseau eventually. And we still understand by a division of powers in a democracy, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary power. And this is a great beginning, I would say, but it's not enough, because Montesquieu's and Rousseau's goal was not to establish 3 state powers, and that's it. They had a different goal, and their goal was to prevent the overconcentration and the according abuse of any type of power. And in a first step, these 3 powers did a very good job, and they're still doing a very good job. And the better they are divided, the better the job they do is. But the question is if it's sufficient for today's needs. And the clear answer is no, it's not sufficient. We need maybe a further development of this division of power. And my proposal is that there could be a first power, not a fourth one, but a first one, which is the constitutive power, which in French language exists, the pouvoir constituant. And this one constitutes the 3 other state powers, but keeping the last word on all important decisions. So we could call it the constitutive power, which constitutes the legislative, executive, and judiciary power. And this is a bit theoretical. I'm getting more practical. The consequence of that could be that the people, as the sovereign instance, as a collective instance, get defined collective rights, which would be enshrined in the Constitution, which today is not the case as far as I'm informed, because fundamental rights are today only individual rights. And this is another fantastic, great achievement, which I fully support. And I even just wrote a book on the strengthening of individual fundamental rights, which is the same as human rights. But now I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about collective fundamental rights. And this is let's say, a brainstorming or a first set of collective fundamental rights. And now I could also call them sovereign rights. And now I have to explain why I chose this term of sovereign democracy, including sovereign rights, because in Latin, sovereign comes from the term superanus and means the highest instance. And a sovereign instance exists in all state forms. It's always the highest instance, nothing else. So in a monarchy, the sovereign is the queen or the king. We just farewelled the sovereign in Great Britain a year ago or 2 years ago. In a democracy, we could not bury the sovereign because we would have to bury all the people. So I think you can see the difference. But if we accept that in a democracy, demos kratos, the people are the highest instance, then of course they have to enjoy some kinds of rights. And this is my modest proposal, how these rights could look like. And it's not totally new what I'm proposing, because some of these rights already exist, or have been implemented as an opportunity that has been given by the government. For instance, writing a new constitution. That was a process that recently took place in Chile. It was not a right that existed in the old constitution, and that was exercised by the people, but it was given by the parliament. But if you look at rights number 4 or 6, these are rights that eventually already exist in countries like Switzerland, Italy, or Uruguay. So the first sovereign rights already exist, and I'm just proposing to enlarge this list of sovereign rights. Just one example: in Italy, the people can stop a parliamentary bill. If the Roman parliament is proposing something what the people don't like, they can move against it, and if they collect 1 million, not even 500,000 of signatures, they can stop the law. And they did it in 2011 when the Berlusconi government wanted to build nuclear power plants and privatize the drinking water supply. And the motion against these two law proposals was successful, and 90% of the people, many of them who had voted for Berlusconi as the governor and the prime minister, then voted against his attempt to privatize drinking water supply and to build nuclear power plants. So this is just one example how the people could have the final word in 2 cases. Now, more very important explanation. These rights would only enter into force in case the parliament is not doing what the majority of the people want to happen. That's one. And the extreme cases that if it goes to war, then people could stop the government from going to war, just to make an extreme case. And the second example is if the parliament is not doing something at all, it's just remaining passive and inactive in a policy field where the people are desiring something. For instance, limiting and lowering inequality. This is one example where I now will give 2 examples, and that's already the end of my presentation. But first, look at the potential thresholds of some of these rights of the citizens, and you see an escalation depending on the impact that right would have. And a simple vote has a comparatively low impact. That's why we could take Switzerland as the benchmark. And if 1% of the people ask for a voting on a specific topic, then it will happen. And of course, then the people can vote against this motion, as in Switzerland is usually the case. 80% of all referendum initiatives in Switzerland fail because Switzerland is a quite conservative country, and the people rather tend to decline proposals from the population. A citizens' assembly is already a larger instrument, and that's why I would put the threshold higher. And an economic convention where you redesign, for instance, the monetary and financial system, which I'm proposing in a different book, should have a still higher level. And of course, the highest threshold would be for a constitutional assembly, which rewrites the whole constitution. This really has to be asked for by a large proportion of the population. And in my last 2 minutes, I give you 2 examples of what could be done different from a simple motion and a simple initiative as already exists in Switzerland, because we're aware of that, and this is nothing new. But a citizen assembly that could be initiated by the citizens and whose recommendations are submitted to referendum for a more complex policy area, that would be a true innovation, if not a democratic revolution. And nowadays, everybody's talking about the ecological boundaries of the planet. And here comes a proposal to also think about social boundaries in order to prevent the over-concentration of power and excessive inequality. And the proposal is that in a citizen assembly, these 5 decisions could be prepared. First, where to limit the inequality in income. Second, to define an upper limit for private wealth, thinking about Musk, etc. Third, limiting inheritance rights. Fourth, limiting the size of companies in order to prevent the dinosaurs that we are facing and struggling with today. And fifth, the size of banks with their total assets. And this is not just a simple referendum. This is a larger exercise, and it could be done in a citizen assembly that is initiated by the citizens, and then the final voting would be done by the sovereign body, means by all the people. And I just mentioned very briefly that if what I have done in 25 countries with hundreds, if not thousands of participants, if they could make several proposals where income inequality could be limited, then they usually vote for a factor 10 or 20, meaning that the highest income should not exceed 10 or 20 times the lowest income. And if you then compare this provisional voting of the people at the left, at the beginning of this row of columns, then you see that this would really make a difference, because today we are at a completely different place. And if the people could have their will implemented, then inequality would be significantly lower. And my second and last example is addressing maybe people's strongest concern in these days. It's their peace, their desire for peace. And what could we do? Well, we could initiate a citizen assembly which is creating a peace perspective rather than deciding on wars or on weapon, on armament increase or weapon exports. We could design a pathway to eternal peace, to quote Kant. And this is just another brainstorming. It's just an example with which I want to show what could be possible if people next to the parliament and next to the government could also contribute to the decision making in a democracy. And I think you can read the components that I'm proposing, but I think all of these elements of consequent peace policy could meet the majority of the citizens in many countries. And then the security policy, the foreign policy, and peace policy, why not, would be a different one than the one we are facing today, at least in many European states where I live. Oh, here's the last slide. I'm sorry. The last slide is an idea of a digital democracy account. And the idea of a digital democracy account is that one day we would have a digital democracy account for all levels, from the local to the global. And we could choose if we want to just be informed in specific selected policy fields, if we want to be consulted, if we want to have a vote on the decisions in these specific fields, of course, according to the rules that are enshrined in the Constitution, or even we could also initiate directly from there a referendum or a decision of the people. I think we should start with dreaming, and this is a very concrete dream. But something is happening. Anyway, I'm done, and here is my last slide. I'm done, and thank you for listening, and maybe also for dreaming with me.
Thank you so much, Christian, and also for ending in such a positive note, because talking about democracy can feel quite daunting these days. So thank you for that introduction and for those positive visions for the future. I'm going to give the word to our guest speaker, João dos Santos. The floor is yours, and please feel free to introduce yourself a little bit further as well.
Sure. Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Christian, and also Raul for helping to organizations. Morning to everyone, at least here in Brazil. It's early morning. My name is João Guilherme. I am one of the directors of Democracia in Xeque Institute, which is an institute in Brazil working with intelligence analysis, developing tools for analyze disinformation online and some information integrity issues online, and also capacitating actors to deal with this kind of issues. Right now, we work in 3 different branches, fighting attacks against democracy, which is one of the most important ones. Another one's helping public health, particularly in what concerns information integrity, and also environmental issues with the very same line. So most of the crises that were presented by Christian here are points that we have worked with and have some examples to bring and share. I think to start with the debate about constitution and the example in Chile quite recently, one thing that we notice is that the role of false information in this kind of sovereign moment, let's put it like that, can jeopardize the process, and is something that raises the question of information integrity. So for the ones not familiar with the term, information integrity was formally launched by the United Nations in the last assembly as one of the important principles, and it encompasses the different kinds of threats that you have in information systems that citizens are involved in. So it goes from rumors and lack of information to disinformation campaigns and influence operations and many other kinds of ways of using information as a weapon to jeopardize democratic processes and many other instances of civic life. And thinking about this specifically, all the moments in which we are open to participations and all the moments in which this kind of crisis, any of the crises mentioned before, plays a big role, is a moment in which concentration of attention means concentration of power. And then we can start debating the role of social media, the role of platforms, the role of people like Musk in this discussion and in enabling democracy. So information integrity is not just about countering a specific kind of false information. It's about the right of citizens to have, just like they could have a health system resilient enough to prevent pandemics and the spread of different kind of virus and so forth, a system that can protect them in a multidimensional approach. They should also be protected when it comes to information. Not protected in the idea that they cannot judge information by themselves, but in the sense that they need to have tools and materials enough to evaluate and judge it appropriately. And that's mainly our field of work. Normally, we tend to think about internet as, at least in the past, I mean, 15 years ago, a lot of people tend to put internet as kind of democratic revolution because in theory, everyone can speak. But one counterpart of this idea that everyone can speak is that not everyone will be heard. Because if everyone is speaking, you need to have a really good filter to define who will or not be heard. And these filters, just like some indicators that were brought by Christian, were not voted for. They are arbitrary, and many times they define a really big, the functioning of a really big economy, which is the economy of attention seems something abstract. But when you talk about platforms, influencers, and all these new terms, we're talking about people that receive money according to how many people they impact, how many people click on what they post, how many times these people spend there, and how many followers they achieve, and so forth. And during the different crises, again, the attacks against democracy, the environmental crisis, and the public health issues we faced recently, many influencers saw that these events, which were events with a really big concentration of attention toward the issues they involved, as economic opportunities to talk about these issues and to make money out of it. not really to inform people, but to take advantage from this huge concentration. So, for example, we had, I don't know if you're aware of, but a catastrophe related with climate emergency quite recently in Brazil, in the south, in which an entire state, and a really big one, went underwater. We're talking about more than 200 people dead in a few days, and many cities directly impacted and completely stopped. And what we saw was that not just many influencers started talking about it, but many of them traveled to the places to make videos and produce content and take advantage from the amount of people trying to know more about this issue. And the main point is that their power of content production was much bigger than the local news media that were directly affected by the catastrophe, or many local instances of information. And once the national media just portrayed it from outside, and when I say that, I mean that if you're inside a crisis, if you're inside fire, you don't need someone to tell you that the house is on fire. I mean, you are inside it. And most of our national media just say, we have big floods in the south and so forth. But people want to know where they should go, what they should do, where is a safe place to stay. And none of this information was available from outside. These influencers not just occupy this place, but some of them use this power for the non-political intentions. For example, saying that agencies that control the road's traffic are preventing donations to come from people affected, or that physicians inside hospitals are not really working to save people. And the result was that people inside a really serious crisis started to have a potentially hostile position against the ones helping them, against physicians and against people bringing donations and so forth. One of these influencers ran it for the São Paulo mayor, which is the biggest city in Brazil with millions and millions of voters. And he got really close to go to the second and final round of the election. And we are talking about the biggest local election in Brazil. And he was not a politician, he was a coach and influencer. So looking at this scenario, we need to have, again, to consider information integrity as a public policy, as something that is part of the basic rights of citizens, either to deal with the emergencies and crises happening in their daily lives, and that will be probably more frequent from now on, but also to decide during political processes. And well, this is the first part of the discussion we could have. And the good news is that we already have tools to deal with that. We have a lot of people working on this kind of issue. Here in Brazil, for example, recently, we had an attempted coup d'etat from Bolsonaro family. You might be aware of that. And we were able to have tools to analyze it quite beforehand, to notice institutions and to prepare the field for when it comes, we will be able to prevent it. The very same goes to this candidate in São Paulo election that I just mentioned before, Marçal. Many people was analyzing it from before. They were talking about the electoral courts and giving them enough proofs and information for them to shut down his profiles during the election campaign once he started to attack the democratic system. So if this was not the case, we would probably have a different result right now. So at the same time, we have a really big problem. We have solutions for that, and we have ways to discuss this. But the main problem concerning these solutions and all these efforts is that we need to start understanding that the role of access to data when it comes to information integrity and public policies in this field. Right now, our access to data in social media platforms comes from decisions of the owners of these platforms. So many times, for example, we show that they have a problematic ranking system or problematic recommendation system, and they shut down our access to the data. And then, of course, they don't have any new problem with it because no one is talking about it anymore. We don't have more proofs, we don't have more issues. And we have less and less data to tackle and deal with this kind of dynamic. That's why I think it is extremely important that the information integrity debates to come for the field through the UN. But it is also important for us to think how we can ensure this as a right, even in this scenario in which all these platforms are private and all the different dimensions involved in this problem. This is the first layer of the problem. I know in 20 minutes I will not talk the entire thing. I'm going as quick as I can without just passing by all the arguments. But another thing that I would like to mention, and we can continue the discussion during the debate phase, is that the examples I gave before are all related with content and information, let's say, inside the platforms. But the power of these actors, Musk particularly, goes beyond because they are investing in infrastructure. And this is barely discussed in many different fields, in many different spheres of debate. When I say that, for example, Starlink internet, the Musk satellites, they are responsible for a good part of internet access in the Amazon region. So when we find gold miners that are jeopardizing indigenous communities, make them sick, attacking them, when people apprehend the anthems that give them access to the internet, most of them are from Starlink. But we cannot really identify people buying it because they don't have a really good system to prevent fraud in this kind of register. And they don't want to improve it, at least when people ask it about it and say 90% of the anthems apprehended are not really well registered in the name of people that bought it. So we cannot really investigate. They doesn't really seem to care. They say we're not forced to have any kind of biometric register or whatever when people buy antennas to go to the Amazon region. We have events before in which Musk shut down the internet access of the specific regions during the war in Ukraine, for example, when Ukraine was going to attack a Russian Navy, and for any reason he disagrees with that. This is in his biography. And he shut down the internet access of the entire region. He directly interfered in a historical event. We like it or not. I mean, I'm not talking about the event itself, but the power that he has. He could do the same in Brazil. He could do the same anywhere. When we talk about internet, we think about information in clouds, accessible anywhere. But these are metaphors and analogies. We don't have this kind of thing. The information goes through huge cables that cross the Atlantic and cross the oceans. And Google, for example, is investing right now to own part of these cables. And again, you have the power to define the internet flow in different ways. I'm not saying it will be impossible for the information to flow other ways, but it will be more costly and slowly, and we will have an impact on internet neutrality, which is something that is extremely important, but not being debated really frequently. Then when we have part of these big tech owners participating in a specific government, in this case, the US, then you have a much bigger problem because all this concentration of power issues and the capacity to interfere in who has access to the internet and how things flow, how information are ranked and what is recommended, mixed with national interests of a specific country. And of course, this is a really, really big threat from the information integrity globally and internationally. I'm not sure how much time does I still have?
I mean, in theory, you have 5 more minutes, but we only have 15 minutes left until 1 o'clock set time. So please go a few more minutes if you want to add anything special.
Yeah, I could go, but I always prefer to discuss and
Yeah,
to know
yeah.
what people are more interested in than to do big monologues about what I would like to say. So if any of the things I just mentioned rings a bell to anyone, please let me know and I could go further and deeper and bring data about it and discuss in depth. And thank you for your time till now.
No, thank you for being here. And I think all of us could have you for 1 hour monologue without a problem because this topic is so important and so urgent, and your expertise is very valuable for all of us. So I think that, I mean, at least if I speak for myself, a 1 hour monologue wouldn't bore me at all. But yeah, I agree with you. It's always nice to bring in conversations as well. So I think what I would like to ask you and Christian, you're more than welcome to unmute Christian so we can have this conversation going. Both of you has touched upon some, challenges in terms of the current decline in democracy. I mean, you, João, mainly a little bit more from the digital landscape that we are in, the ownership and the communication information, how it's spread and by whom and why. And Christian, you're talking a little bit more from the institutional perspectives and the lack of, people's participation in the democracy in several different ways. But if both of you would mention by one word, a couple, a maximum three, major threats to democracy today, what would that be?
Shall I start?
Yeah, please, Christian.
Yeah, and I start with the commonalities with João, because we now kind of approached the same topic from different sides, but the commonalities in the center where we meet is power concentration in media ownership. And I think we really have to address that topic and deconcentrate power in media ownership. Going to socialization of platforms, or at least defining the community rules by democratic processes. That's the minimum, but I would rather go for socialization. And the second most important keyword is infrastructure. I totally agree that infrastructure has to be public. Starlink can't be in private possession, and cross-sea cables can't be in private possession. That's is a no-go. This basic communication infrastructure has to be a public good, has to be a public service, and can't be private. And yeah, and maybe a third, which I already mentioned, if there was an upper limit for private wealth, let's say between 10 million euros, dollars, francs, or pounds, and 100 million, somewhere in between, then we would not have Musk, and we would not have Bezos, and Bezos could not own the Washington Post, and Musk could not buy Twitter, now X, and we had no Bill Gates, who is now stepping up from third to second place in funding the World Health Organization, and so on. And so we had no oligarchs. Now, Princeton University said oligarchs, not the Russian one. We had neither Russian oligarchs nor oligarchs in any other country. So maybe this is one of our common interests to limit power in individual people. This is going in the totally wrong direction, and it will take us away democracy, it will take us away fundamental rights, and it will take us away even our livelihoods, as the Amazonian rainforest example from João showed.
João, what would you say?
Yeah, I'm trying to bring one word that encompasses everything, but I will not be
Or
able to
three.
do that. I will use three for sure. And besides the ones that Christian just mentioned, I think perhaps shared basic values, in a sense that last year, 80 different countries went through elections. Many of them were really close, like really close. And we defeated or were defeated by people with extremely radical positions, not recognizing, I mean, really basic human rights values of any group, either migrants or indigenous groups, or many of the other. This idea that half of some places' population is aligned with this kind of thing shows how we are losing the shared ground through which we normally build democracy and build consensus. And this is something that make me think a lot to this as a really big threat. A second one, I think, is the environmental one. We are getting out of time. We have COP30 in Brazil this year, and we are seeing the amount of actors organizing themselves against COP30. I mean, even with all the climate emergencies, even with all the problems we are facing right now, this is still like not done. People are still mobilizing against really basic scientific facts when it comes to this specific topic. And the last one is, I mean, we have many important things already mentioned, but I would just go again to the data access, because data access is not just people wanting to know what is the trend topics. It's about being able to do public health, public policies in a data-driven perspective and deal with really basic issues in a country that has the size of a continent, in the case of Brazil, that you definitely cannot do if you don't have access to the data. Or you will do it based on what appears more, and it benefits the southeast, but totally ignores the north of the country and all the Amazonian region and so forth, because the indigenous groups will never be the biggest population in the country. And if you just look to what appears more, you will look to Rio and São Paulo, basically, from an information integrity perspective. It will be like doing a public health policy, thinking about in what diseases appear more. And then you look to flu and ignores malaria or any really serious threat just because it don't contaminate most of the population. With information, is the very same thing. People look what have more views, what have more likes, and totally ignore that this might not be the biggest threats. The biggest threat might be extremely problematic, even if it just reaches 2,000 people. And I think ignoring this, it's a problem right now, and don't having access to the data is something that prevents us from any measure in this direction.
Thank you so much. Both of you mentioned a little bit some solutions ahead as well, because when we're talking about democracy, people might easily just think about the ability to vote. You know, what some of us who live in more liberal democracies, what we do every fourth year, we go there, we vote, and in between there, we don't do much. And when there's an election turning out the way we don't like, we just have to live with it. I mean, both we see also trends in many countries where not only the ability to vote, but the democratic space is shrinking, right? Such as freedom of speech and so on, which also threatens the ability to vote in the future or trust the voting system. But if you would give a few suggestions or inspirations to people who are in this room or people who are worried about democracy, how can we be active citizens reclaiming democracy? Because you've been mentioning a few very powerful names, you know, they have a lot of power, and individuals who can feel quite small in this in comparison, you know. So what would your suggestions be for us as people, as citizens, to kind of reclaim democracy, to safeguard democracy, and actively participate in a democratic society, for a democratic society, not only waiting for the next opportunity to vote that will happen in another 4 years. So what would be your recommendations or advice, or how do you view that aspect? Because I think there's a lot of people who might be quite worried and scared at the moment. You can start, João, if you want to. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I think this kind of meeting in which we exchange experiences and see common breaches and try to think about collectively is a really good starting point for any action in this sense. And I like to think about collaborating. And one example that I really appreciated was when I was the data analyst for Internews in the Amazon region. We had a project about the pandemic in indigenous and quilombola communities. And so we look at what was happening online, but we had in the field different indigenous communicators and quilombola communicators. I'm not sure if you know what quilombola means, but people from previously enslaved ancestors that escaped slavery and did free communities, mostly in forests in Brazil. And the descendants of these groups are called quilombolas. And so we had these indigenous communicators and quilombola communicators that sent to us which kind of false information they were seeing in their daily lives and helped us to understand how the information we are seeing was being interpreted locally. And this was extremely important for us to do anything and find interesting solutions that in the end we were able to find. So talking about information and platforms, which is my field of work, the false information and this kind of issue, you have one information, you have one fact checking, but the way the information is interpreted in many different places, cultures and locals are essentially local. They cannot be understood from above. So if we have a big set of partners helping us, debating with us what they are seeing in their place, how all kinds of information are being interpreted in these places, we are able to take much better action in this sense. And we are able to bring them to participate in different ways in democratic solutions for what we are seeing. Then we have groups of scientists doing this. We have group of journalists doing this. I mean, I think it's easy to contribute if you organize and connect with people that are fighting for solutions.
Mm. But I could add to this.
Yes, please.
Yeah, well, on the local level, what we could do to encourage and to empower people to envision and also live a stronger and more participatory and direct democracy is these conventions or citizen assemblies, however we call them. They could be exercised in any community, in a quilombolo or in a municipality or in an association, and then the exercise in a playful manner to limit inequality and to limit power concentration, or to envision which are the next 5 concrete steps towards eternal peace. I think that would really encourage and empower people if they just took this liberty to discuss on these extremely high, far-reaching and high-flying topics and take concrete decisions. Although they would not have a direct impact because they are not the United Nations and they're not the government of their country, but they would, in a first step, take the liberty to think freely and discuss freely, and then to decide collectively on these issues for the local level. For the general mankind and womankind, I would recommend exactly the same that we have achieved in the ECG movement, which is first we should talk and agree upon a model, and we should have 5 to 10 cornerstones of the democracy of tomorrow that we envision. No matter if it's called common good democracy or sovereign democracy or direct democracy or real democracy, the name doesn't matter so much, but there should be a concrete model which millions, if not billions of people think it's worth striving towards and even fighting for. And maybe then we have to build a movement. First the model, then the movement, and it could be another Greta Thunberg. It could be another Gandhi. Maybe in times of social media, it's a virtual person that is proposing that. But the point is, we have to create a movement. If we don't create a movement for this deeper, more participatory, more direct, more common good oriented democracy with power, with limitation of power concentration, I think we will not get it. And maybe it's a joint challenge for diverse movements who are engaging in the field of the environment and in the field of women's rights and in the field of decolonization and in other fields, because this is the common denominator. Without a better, stronger, and more effective democracy, we most probably will not be successful in any of these other fields. And this is the mutual feedback. The more successfully we limit power concentration, the higher the probability that we get a better democracy. And the better democracy that we struggle for and get, the higher the probability to limit power concentration. And I think these are the two twin targets that we could strive for in a new global movement, which could be also a movement of movements, which still remain with their topics and their targets and their expertise. But this is something everybody needs, and maybe we have to agree upon a model of a future democracy and then create a movement of movements in order to get it.
Thank you so much, Christian. So everyone here who's engaged in any kind of movement can feel that they might already be a part of the solution, so the way moving forward. I can see some reflections are showing up in the chat. I mean, please feel free to add your answers and your reflections and your thoughts. I know there's a lot of wisdom in this room because there always are. We all carry wisdom. So please feel free to do that. I've seen some of you have been adding your own answers to the questions and maybe also turning and twisting this conversation of how, democratic our society is really. But I think I would like to, and you can also start to add your questions to Christian and João, but I think I would like to invite Martje Visser. You had a question about youth perspective. Are you comfortable to ask it if you want to unmute? Otherwise, I can just read it up.
Yes.
Please ask the question. And introduce yourself, of course.
All right. So my name is Martje, and I'm a student at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. So my question is about how to involve youth in democracy and also how to actually protect them in terms of this information integrity. Like one example is that what I see is that young people get influenced by like far right ideals. Because then these politicians make funny videos on TikTok, for example. So I'm curious what your views are on, how to deal with this, I guess, and also how much to involve like young people and children also in this process. Yeah, thank you.
Who would like to start?
I don't see if João is raising his hand as well.
No,
then of course, João, please go ahead.
No, you can start and then I
Yeah. Well, I start with one possible answer. I see three types of citizen assemblies. The ideal one is the one that is enshrined in the future constitution of many countries, which can be initiated by the citizens. No? If a sufficient number of citizens ask for it, then this citizen assembly can be initiated. It does not exist in any country so far as I'm informed. But the second form has been taking place in many countries already, from Ireland to Canada to Germany to France to Austria. And this is a form where the government decided that a citizen assembly is going to happen. It's a grace from the government that it, or the parliament could also be that it happened. Second best, not the process I'm envisioning, but second best. And in the best case, in the second case, the results of the citizen assembly, especially of those in Ireland, were submitted to a nationwide referendum, and the elaborated solution in the citizen assembly was implemented. For instance, two solutions for same-sex marriage in Ireland and also on abortion. And in the worst case, the citizen assembly takes place and then nothing happens. This is a waste of time, and it's a strategy to frustrate citizens. And I would never support a citizen assembly if those who initiate it, being the parliament or the government, do not promise and clearly define what will happen with the results, no? As a side remark. And the third one is those exercises, which I was already talking about in reference to the Quilombos or any other community. These exercises, or also democracy games, we could call them, they could be also done with young people who have not yet the right to vote. And this could be financed by the city in which they live. It could be financed by the country, by the government, and it could be proposed and initiated by movements advocating democracy. In Germany, for instance, there is a very strong and powerful movement that is called More Democracy, and they are doing these kinds of assemblies funded by the association. And one concrete solution is that these citizen assemblies are also organized for younger people in order to hear their voices, in order to train communication skills, democracy skills, and decision-making skills. This is my last my last input, because I saw in the chat that somebody from Switzerland said, "Okay, well, Christian, we have a higher degree of democracy in Switzerland, but people are much better educated in Switzerland." And I don't argue that, but I would make a last comment on the Swiss direct democracy, which on the one hand, I'm jealously observing, because we do not have the same degree of democracy in Austria. But on the other hand, I see a deficiency and a flaw of the Swiss model, because all you can make in Switzerland is make one proposal, and then everybody has to vote in favor or against. And this is one reason why so many of these popular initiatives fail, because there's just one solution on the table. And a very effective instrument to improve the solution that is on the table is to allow several solutions. And then they can be discussed. And in the process, people will not vote on one solution, but on 3 or 4 or 5 solutions. And I'm talking about a systemic consensus voting and decision-making mechanism. And this is also a great instrument to vote on a topic where not everybody is well informed about. So it's also fit for communities or for larger populations on topics where there is little or no pre-education on. With these several solutions, people are made fit for voting. And this is also an answer to the comment in the chat.
Thank you, Christian.
Yes, I will try to be brief, but because Christian also gave a great part of the answer. Thinking about information integrity, one good example was that once investigating vaccine disinformation, we found that many kinds of false information were related to heavy metals in the vaccine, either mercury or, well, they go over and over with different metals. And many people are saying, why are people believing this? And they also always believe again, and we need to debunk again and again. And one of the points that we have pointed out was that instead of just debunking every time a new sort of disinformation appears, why we don't try to understand why they have this issue with metals, with this specific place. And happens that it was a place where you have a big problem of gold mining, and they have contamination of mercury in the fishes, and many people were contaminated and so forth. So the reason for them to be so anxious about metals in the vaccine have to do with the historical factors and the daily lives, and how the lack of public policy to ensure minimum safety put them in this position. I think when it comes to the youth and how they believe and many times support part of the far-right visions and radical actors in general, don't have to do with the information itself, have to do with some anxieties and fears that are not properly worked with, and that these actors take advantage of. And if we could deal with it in a better way, perhaps we will be able to prevent this from being a problem, not needing to debunk all the TikTok videos or make people dancing in all the platforms to try to compete with them in different ways. Here in Brazil, for example, in the last presidential election, more than 50% of the youth in some polls were against the far right, and just 20% were in favor. In fact, this was a driving force for us to defeat the radical actors. So we should also be careful with this, sometimes this stereotype of young people being all, at least the male ones, being incels and so forth, how to tackle this. I think we do have a lot of radical actors in the youth. Here in Brazil, we have extremely undemocratic influencers that are quite young and bringing trouble, but we cannot we cannot let this prevent us from seeing how quite progressive and innovative young influencers could help us and could help us to deal with this kind of specific thing. And sometimes we don't pay enough attention. But I think the root of the problem in this specific case is not the information itself. It's how fears and anxieties that are not properly worked in the political landscape migrate to this kind of easy solution based on any kind of undemocratic and illiberal action. So I think the mental health of the youth, for many different reasons, I mean, totally understandable issues, is something that should be discussed more in deep.
Thank you so much. I can see that this topic brings a lot of interest, and the chat is warm and people sharing their perspectives, and there's more questions. If it's okay for you, João and Christian, please feel free to share your contact details. So if people want to keep the conversation going or invite you guys in another setting, I think this is a topic that we need to keep warm. We need to keep on discussing. I see also a lot of challenges, like you, João, you mentioned, if regarding minorities. So what if the public or the citizen assembly vote for things that might, harm human rights for certain groups, and how do we make sure that the democracy go hand in hand with human rights and amplify human rights? And now with this digital landscape you're talking about, and the challenges that we are facing, transform it in a governance system that is very slow. I think you already mentioned, Christian, how poorly democratic it actually is. So it's also very hard to address these things. And with the development of AI, things are moving very quickly at the moment.
Can I make it? It's such a quick one. Can I just make a 2 sentences?
Yeah, I'm just going to wrap up, and I'm going to give the word to both of you to do some final points, Christian.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so you will have a final pulse. So I just want to say thank you everyone for being here, in case you need to leave because we're 15 minutes past. We'll share the contact details to Christian and João in the chat. We'll also share the If you haven't signed up for ECOnGOOD newsletter, please do so, because we are a movement working for the economy for common good, where democracy is one of the core principles. So I also hope you feel more inspired to stay engaged in our movement and stay updated. We're going to wrap up and sum up now. I'm going to give the word for you, Christian. A final few sentences to wrap up this discussion. What do you want to bring, and then also to João and for you to sum up. And I think after that we'll finish for today. So thank you both for being here.
So,
yes, Christian.
you invited me to start, so yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, a very short remark on this. What if a popular initiative is going to threaten minority rights, for instance, or fundamental rights? And it's a quick and easy one. It would happen the same. What happens if the parliament is going to do so? If the parliament is going to threaten a minority right, or to violate a minority's right, or to abolish a fundamental right, then the constitutional court would say that's not possible, that's against the constitution. And the electoral authority would do the same, exactly the same, if the people proposed to do so. So if there were an initiative that is proposing to violate a minority right or to abolish a fundamental right, the electoral and the voting authority would just say this is not admissible, it's against the constitution. So that the constitution would have to change before, eventually, and only then the parliament would be in condition to do so. There is no effective mechanism against that in a democracy, and the same would have to happen with the people. So there is no final guarantee that fundamental rights and minority rights will hold forever. But there's a very strong protection that there cannot just be a proposal to abolish one fundamental right, or to abolish the protection of minorities, because for that general proposal, I think there will not any longer be any majority in any country. So I hope that was understandable. And my last remark is that the topic of fighting disinformation and misinformation, I did not very deliberately not enter it. I just want to have mentioned it's a very tricky topic, because it's not easy to decide what misinformation or even a false information is. And it depends who is taking the authority to take this decision. And we had the same problem in the mainstream media all the time. Now, just one example, US government attacked Iraq on the base of a clear disinformation. You could also call it a lie. And 13 European countries joined a war of attack against international law. So disinformation was spread in the mainstream media. And I totally agree that we should work on information integrity, even if it's a buzzword, but I support that. I like the word, and I would support work on information integrity. But I would warn from a new war against disinformation or misinformation, which is not clear about the terms, which is not clear about who has the authority to decide what is misinformation, what is disinformation. And this would, in my idea, would be an own conversation worth, for which today we don't have the time. But as a final remark, I wanted to just address and touch this topic.
Thank you so much, Christian, and thank you for being here. Please, Joe, go ahead.
First of all, thanks everyone for participating, hearing, and for all the contributions in the chat. I will not have time to debate AI, but I put a link in the chat of an experiment I've made in Amsterdam last year in the summer school. And feel free to contact and be in touch if you're facing any kind of problem related to information integrity and elections, or public health or environment in your countries. We can think about joint projects. We are quite used to this kind of thing. And just a final clarification, we have a big difference between the way some words are used in news media and the way they are used in the scientific field, for example. And when it comes to the scientific discussion, disinformation is a specific kind of information campaign. It is intentional, it is often funded. Then you can prove that something is or not part of a disinformation campaign. It's not enough to be false information. But we have several different concepts like rumors, and many times I totally agree that people use false information, rumor, disinformation, influence operations as if they were the same thing. And it ends up kind of jeopardizing the discussion and the use of the terms. But anyway, I do agree that information integrity is the best point. The definition and all the criteria are in the UN document about information integrity for global policy that they launched last year. And I will be glad to discuss it again, I mean, as many times as this thing. It is, it is useful for going up in the discussion. Many thanks again for the invitation, and hope to see you.
Thank you again for being here. We just also learned it's a public holiday in Brazil and it's a very early morning for you. So a special thanks for showing up on this time and this hour and this date. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for joining. I hope you signed up for this newsletter to stay updated on the economy for common good. And we'll meet in future conversation and continue this conversation in other different fields. So thank you all for being here. Enjoy your day, regardless if it's early morning, midday, or afternoon. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Danke.
Thanks and take